Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to this week's AI Kingdom Fireside Chat with Roger and Nathan. We're going to be covering a bunch of different topics today. It's been a very exciting week, the last week, probably the most exciting week I can ever imagine in terms of updates, progress, and actual hands-on playing with stuff. Yeah, we're going to go through a few of the different updates, and then talk about our programmers' experience having access to the GPT-4 8K token limit model, about what we've actually learned using it for a week, and then a brief update of what we're actually working on the project towards the end. So we'll cover the ups and the pros and cons of using OpenAI. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, sometimes it's working, sometimes it's not. How we've been able to work around that. We'll cover something that's come to light, which is an interesting project called LangChain. We'll go into fine tuning an Alpaca model, which we can run locally, reviewing some of the latest Mid-Journey 5 changes, looking at Bard very briefly just to see. It hasn't been exciting enough for us to dive in and actually start using that, but just see where it's at. Yeah. And we'll talk about a couple of tools that we think should exist based on our experience for a week. And yeah, we'll take it from there.
I know that it was a huge week last week for this field of AI. There was some key announcements that were made. The biggest one that, of course, everyone was raving about was the launch of GPT-4, which was released by OpenAI into ChatGPT, and you could access it if you had the GPT Plus plan. And then on the same day, if you're a developer, you could apply to get access to the GPT-4 API, which Nathan and I both use independently. And then within probably, I would say, 3 days, we had access, which was really cool. We don't have access to the announced and everyone's anticipating still there's 2 things actually that everyone's still anticipating that hasn't been released that we know is a part of GPT-4, and that is the 32K model, 32K token limit. So Nathan and I have access to the 8K model in the API currently, but not the 32K. I think we applied for it. I'm not sure. If you know a way to apply for it, let us know. We haven't done a second application. Then the other thing was the multimodal functionality, which was shown in the live demo by OpenAI, so the AI could read an image and tell you quite accurately what was in it. And you could potentially mock up a website and give it to it, and it could output the HTML, the PHP. But we just haven't tested that
I
yet.
am.
We're
I'm
excited
guilty
to
of
use
doing
it.
that with my designer. I've given her napkins before with, we need an app like this. And so I'm very curious to see how much it can accelerate her, her flow when I have
Yeah.
a caffeinated, caffeine fueled idea. Yeah. So that'll be
Yeah, yeah,
interesting.
me too. I'm excited to use it. There'll be heaps, and no doubt there'll be heaps of apps that will just be like build a website in seconds and
Yeah.
all of
I
those
think,
types of
I think
things.
the advantage, I was chatting about it. I think the advantage is really, it's not going to replace designers, at least not at this stage. But what it does is, it's if you need something functional that you need like to input data or something, you could potentially mock that up very quickly and have it generated.
Yeah,
Maybe one other thing we could cover is, I think Google and Microsoft are both looking at integrating that into the application side of things. So I don't know how
mm,
exciting that is for our viewers, but everyone probably touches one of those tools. So that'll be
yeah,
interesting
that's
to see.
right. Yeah, I haven't had much experience with it. I don't deliberately go and use those tools. I'm mostly on the coding. But yeah, I can imagine there is a wave. It's going to revolutionize search to some degree, and we don't know how that's going to be impacted yet. There's a lot of conversation about it's going to be really good for informational content. So an example that I was talking about it with a colleague was like the how old is Taylor Swift type thing. Like people who are writing blog articles about that probably just wasting their time because people aren't going to browse through lots of websites to get that information. So probably they just want a direct response. Just examples like that. So a lot of information
I
based
think it'll be
articles. We'll see.
I think it'll be interesting to see what if they use the like Google Drive or whatever Microsoft's using these days. Imagine taking all the organizational documents for that and creating some sort of organizational memory that you could query. I have this all the time where I maybe heard from an old lead or prospect, and I need to pull up like who they are, where they're from, what time zone they're in, when I can schedule a
Mm,
meeting with them. What did I tell them already? And being able to pull up something like that, or being able to ask, hey, who is John Smith? And like, give me a synopsis of when I last spoke to him, and then being able to do that. And it already has all the data potentially, maybe not for our organization, but for some people, they keep everything in their Google or Microsoft system.
yep,
So yeah, that would be pretty cool to do.
that would be epic. Would be a lot of privacy concerns, but also, man, imagine
All,
that
all the
if you
data is
plug this
already
in.
sold to advertisers, right? So yeah, so a week of using GPT-4, we can pull up the status of an AI status. and you'll see in here it's brutal. Like there's
Yeah.
been a lot of times major outage for
Outage
3
for
hours
3
here.
hours. Almost
Here,
every week, there's some pretty serious stuff.
yeah,
It's
and even as
happened
a
multiple times where I've been trying to use the API and I just can't. It's for hours, and then sometimes that would affect ChatGPT and the playground in the back end.
yeah, and so I've noticed, yeah, to just go down for very long periods of time, and then even as a paying plus subscriber, you still don't have access to it.
Yeah.
And there but I did find that I was able to still use the API more often than not, and so I just wanted to let people know you might be a Playing Plus subscriber, but if you do have an organization, you can go to the playground.
You can just go to mode and click chat.
Where's the mode?
Over to the right, it says complete. It says mode, it says complete on the right side. Yeah, and then go to chat.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then
so
you
when
can
you
choose your model as well.
yeah, when you that's a good way, I didn't know you could yeah, so you can do this complete thing, but,
That just
if you
uses the GPT-3, yeah.
yeah. So the nice thing about this is that you can put in your system message and stuff that we've been over before. In here, you can change your model to if you have access to it to GPT-4, and you can go and interact with it this way. The downside is that so far I haven't seen. It looks like you do have history, do you? No.
Yeah, there's a bit of history there, it looks like.
End of 30-day history.
Yeah.
Um.
Disappears. I lost something yesterday. I was working on this awesome email, and I was working on a software platform that I lost access to, and I lost the email. I was like, "Ah," it took me like half an hour to do that. So then I jumped across to ChatGPT, and usually they have the history there, but it went down. The history's always seems to be down and not
Yeah.
working. It says, yeah.
Yeah. And so this
So
is what I've noticed as well. The history
I
is
seem to have
gone.
lost it for good so far.
Yeah. There are a couple of plugins that you can use. Like I've seen a couple of plugins that will sync the files to your computer and stuff so
That's a
that you
good
don't
idea.
lose the history. And I have done that in the past. What also is interesting is once when we started out with GPT-4, it was 100 messages, wasn't it, like every 4 hours?
Yeah, I think
And
so.
now it's down to 25 messages every 3 hours.
And then it says
So
expect it to significantly lower as
yeah.
we adjust.
That's on their subscriber model, but if you hit that limit or you find that it's down, what I was doing is I was jumping across and I was using this method
Yeah,
here.
so you need to register for for the API, which is free to use. It does cost money, but it's just a per
Yeah.
token usage, so it's actually not much. It probably works out cheaper than ChatGPT in most
Uh,
cases, unless
yeah.
you're doing huge amounts of content.
And I don't know if I can, let me see if I can just pull this up in a different window and see. I don't want to expose my private keys here, but I wanted to show you the pricing and how, like, just from a week of using it, like where I'm up to in terms of the pricage. Here we go. So here's the
I should look at
URL.
mine too, actually.
You come in here this particular day. I can't remember what I was doing, but I think it was coding or summarizing meetings or something. And so I've used up $3 that day. So this is certainly going to be more expensive than just using the Chat GPT model. And yeah, so on top of the Chat GPT Plus subscription, I'm also up for another $8 at the moment.
Yeah,
Um,
my biggest day was $4, and I know on that day I did something like 30,000 words or something. And I think this whole month I'm around $19 US. Had a few $3 days.
yeah, okay. Interesting. Yeah, so it's definitely, but I mean, the value that it delivers, if it saves you. Like for me, I've been able to double my productivity, I would have to say, with coding, and maybe that's something that we can elaborate on a bit more now. Just gonna take this tab down here. So,
Yeah, let's talk
the
about I'll just give an intro to this section. GPT-4, of course, is really great for coding. You probably experienced it, some of your listeners on ChatGPT. GPT-3 was good for coding as well. It's way faster than GPT-4. But what we've found with GPT-4 is that it's more thorough in the way it writes code. And you can, because you've got that master prompt, which you do have for 3.5 as well, but you can get really creative and give it abilities and traits a little that are so much more than what a normal developer would probably have. So as a result, you end up getting much higher quality code out. Well, I found anyway. There's still issues. There's still times where it doesn't get it perfectly right, or it doesn't use a variable when it should, or maybe it does. It's made assumptions about an API, third-party API that aren't quite correct. But it's so good to have that back and forth with it to go, okay, well, you got JSON object wrong for this API structure. How about this is an example of the API structure now that we've got the response coming back. And then he goes, oh, yes, sorry, I apologize for the mistake.
I
Yes,
like
well,
that. I apologize.
yeah,
Sorry, I
it actually
apologize.
apologizes.
Even when I've been wrong, it apologizes. And I'm
Yeah,
like, "Oh, you've been a little bit
someone's
diplomatic
pulling
there."
the right strings. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so a couple of the things that I've noticed with using this, like, I've been able to the way as a programmer I've been able to use it, I've been getting in around 3 or 4 hours of programming a day first thing in the morning, and it's first helped me figure out, like, the strategy. Sometimes I don't know exactly what it is that I have to do, and so I could say how like, maybe I need to add an endpoint to an API to do something, and ask it for which libraries to use or how to do it, and so to get a sort of high level objective. So one thing to do is to ask it to write pseudocode before it goes into writing the
Mm,
actual code, help it brainstorm strategies about how to solve a problem using pseudocode. Say it's quicker because GPT-4 can be a bit slow and it saves you tokens, is my thinking. So once you know what you want to do, I found some interesting things like loading the context. Like one of the issues I was working on was deploying a Django application into production effectively.
mm,
So there, it needed to touch multiple files. Like there was like Nginx, Docker, GitLab. It was interacting with, and then Django. So there was like all these files that needed to be there were working files, and I was making changes to them all simultaneously, and they needed to all get to a state where they all work together. And so by having a long running thread, I was able to load those files into the context, and then it would make changes and suggest to make changes to stuff. But there were too many files, even for the 8K model. I think the chat GPT is using the 4K model. So in the chat, it wasn't able to keep track of the original files that I'd put, and then it would start to output stuff again that was
mm.
wrong. So that was a bit frustrating. And I think that would be helped by larger context.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I found too is when you wanna give it usually when I work with something, I work with it's written and make some changes myself, bring that whole thing that I've changed in here so it has the context of the changes I've made. And then sometimes these scripts, once it's properly formatted and got comments in it, it can be hundreds and hundreds of lines of code. So, yeah, that higher context, 8,000 seems to be a good sweet spot at the moment for programming at least.
Yeah, I agree. Um, so one
Of
of the
course,
things,
larger would always be better, but definitely the purpose-built sort of model. I think that's what I was reading about today, is that there's probably gonna end up being a whole heap of purpose-built models that you could run locally, which all have various number of token counts built specifically for specific applications, like using a book or helping you with starting a business or all these different models.
I'm going to see if I can share with you guys something I was working on earlier. So one of the things that I found was useful is if token limits and it's slow, like you wanted to make multiple changes at once. And so I got to this point where when I'm programming, I usually go through a phase where I'm planning all the things I need to do. And might be working on a particular class and I'll add to the bottom of the class documentation to the doc string. I'll just add in like to do, add logging of the information, add blah, 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 add additional parameters, X, Y, and Z. And so I realized that as I was doing that, I was basically saying all the changes I wanted to make. And I wondered if I just pasted that directly into GPT-4 and said, action the changes here, and what it would do. And I found it actually was quite effective at making a majority of those changes. It still did need a manual
Mm,
code review, but it did the grunt work of making the changes for me. So I was like, not only is it works with my flow because I'm approaching a problem where I'm treating it almost like pair programming where I'm like, we map the things that we want to do in one phase, and then we pick one of the ones. What I would usually do is, as a human, I would work on them one at a time. But GPT can work on, and you've seen people talking about this. Like I can't remember the exact terminology, but if you say had something that you wanted it to classify, like maybe you wanted to classify people's name as male or female or something like that, you could ask it to do them one at a time, but you could also just give it a list and ask it to do it, and it would do the list.
mm.
So it can actually work well in this parallel mode where it's satisfying multiple objectives
Yeah.
simultaneously, which I
Yeah,
would
and I've experienced that. So if you can actually be way more thoughtful in just one really good prompt, you can generally get a lot more done prompt after and chaining prompts that way, just because of the speed of current GPT-4 model. So an example is I would often create a prompt that says, write a Python class that helps me achieve X. but we also want to achieve the following. And then I would list like 4 or 5 things. And then each time I get the response, I go, great, here's some feedback. Can we make these following changes? List 4 or 5 things. And then that ultimately helps us iterate faster than just doing, because you
Yeah.
sometimes don't know what you need to change till after you try to run it. But yeah,
Yeah, I think yeah, so that's right. You asked to make a few changes and probably you could probably make more changes, but the limit
probably.
is I think you need to do the human review. So if you've made it to do told it
It
to do 5
starts to
things,
become, yeah, too complicated.
yeah, then you can review that has it done those 5 things in the response. Whereas if you were asking it to do 100 things, it might be too hard to actually verify that it works.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was really interesting. That's a way like a bit of a productivity hack.
Another, you mentioned classification before. Another good example of that I used recently was reading YouTube descriptions through the YouTube Data API to determine whether that description had like copyright information in there. So an example is a lot of people put copyright free or not for copyright type stuff up that you can freely use, but you might need to provide attribution or something like that. But that it's so nuanced. You got to look on their webpage or you got to look on the description. What's the nuance thing? And so what I did was wrote a classification type of master command to automatically classify and identify certain words and certain languages about getting instructions if we need attribution, and any specific contact information or emails that we need to say, hey, this person created this rain video that we used as an overlay in our video, to make sure we're just crossing our dots and T's. And it was pretty good at it. Obviously, it doesn't fit every case, but it was pretty good.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. On the programming side of it, the other thing is like after I'd made the bunch of changes, I would group the changes, review them, stage them for committing, and then it came back to writing the commit message. And I was like, oh, I hate writing commit messages, especially meaningful ones that are not just, especially when you're trying to get something working and you just want to like test something or you just want to iterate quickly. You don't want to be writing long commit messages. So I asked ChatGPT, given that I had this long running thread and it was helping me to iterate through the changes, I would then go and make some myself, but I was able to ask it to write a commit message for me, and it did a really good job. It would write the high level commit message, and then it would dot point the actual things that were changed in more detail. So I think that is a really good use case for it. So not only is it helping you make the changes, it's also helping you
Mm,
write the commit message. I would often then go back and while I was doing something else, I would maybe copy the class and I would say, can you help me document this following
yeah.
best practices? And that would be a slow process because it would potentially rewrite the whole file, but it did document the thing. And so what I was able to do is I was able to leave on one screen, no, 3 screens. One screen is the thing that I just deployed. It's undocumented. It's running. It's going through the deployment, so I can smoke test on staging. While that's happening, I've got ChatGPT-4 running and documenting the code, and then on my main screen, I'm working on the next problem. And so for me, that feels like a really good kind of setup. Doesn't
I
always
think
work
that,
exactly like that, but
yeah, I think that's really good, because that's one of the biggest challenges, particularly for Python developers. Is we all love Python because it's such a easy to read language, and it does have the ability to have really good, if you define all the doc strings, you get to self-documenting code. And that's the same thing Nathan and I, sounds like we discovered it the whole time, is at roughly around the same time, is doing doc strings for your Python functions and README files. You can do them really quickly if you just pass it the code, and it can churn out all of those things. Even though GPT-4 takes a while, like if you're doing like a 300 line piece of code, it takes a while to do all the doc strings. It's still way quicker than
I've
if
got
you
a
were to do it yourself. So.
I've got a question for you. How do you decide, given that you've only got 25 messages every 3 hours, did you find
Mm.
yourself going back to using a slower model?
Did you see that in ChatGPT? It gave you an option to switch to the default model, which is the fast turbo
Yeah.
GPT 3.5. So there's been times where I've hit the limit and I've had to just continue with that model, and it seems to take on the context,
Oh, does
which
it?
is, yeah, it seems to, because it happens in the same thread. You don't have to go press a new chat. If you hit the limit, it just says the error message comes off at the bottom, and then
Mhm.
it says you want to continue on the
Oh,
turbo
okay.
model.
I haven't seen that. I don't know if I've hit the limit too
I,
much yet.
okay, I've hit it, yeah, countless times.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we covered README files, we covered writing code, and yeah, using it to complete your entire to-do list at once. The other
Maybe
thing
explain that. Maybe did you? I don't know if you really explained that. Like, it was actually the to do element. So you actually had in the doc strings of the
I've got
Python functions, you had the hash to
yeah, okay.
do function.
So I've copied in here something that I want to get done, right? So I'm just gonna do a little example here. I hate making you guys listen to me type this stuff. So I'm gonna have to. Sorry, guys. Roger, you can do a monologue while I get this working. If you
Sure. Oh, I got to
um,
think of something now. Yeah, it's pretty cool that the thing that's got me is that it has opened up a whole new world of programming to people who are not necessarily experts in these industries or these types of projects. And it was when you're programming, the old model was when you're stuck, jump on, read the documentation, get a little bit overwhelmed with the documentation, jump onto Stack Overflow, see if someone solved it. If they haven't solved it, ask some questions on Stack Overflow. Someone might not get back to you for a day. So this kind of reduces that. I feel like I haven't really looked at Stack Overflow for a few weeks now. Usually I would be looking at it daily. That sucks for Stack Overflow but the data that they've got there is still very valuable and I do still definitely use it. But what's great is just increase the productivity significantly. Like I've gone from writing maybe if you average out across the whole year, like 100 lines of code every couple of days to 400 lines of code a day. Like you just, the productivity increase can be wild. So yeah, just keep that in mind. If you're wanting to start programming, it's a really good way to rapidly learn a programming language. Yeah, so if you know what the inputs of the function should be and you know what the outputs of the function should be, then it can typically do a pretty good job and then it will write it and it explains it quite well so you can understand it and learn it. And then you
okay,
can go and implement it and troubleshoot it. And that's where the real learning happens.
okay. So I've set up my little mock here. Thanks for covering me there, Rog.
That's all right.
And so the way I was doing it is I was putting in this tick, and then I was putting it was a Python file. I was listing the to-dos here of what I want done, and I was using like to do colon, and then I made sure to reference to do colon up here. I know it's weird to put to do colon, but
So yeah,
um,
I want you to help complete the to-dos in this code. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And then the to-dos are add an additional parameter for a timestamp. I don't even know why I would need that, but rename or refactor the function to be a class
Yep.
and rewrite the documentation strings using Morse code. So just something funny. So we'll see how it goes here. Here's the modified code. Was it completed to do items? Yeah, so it's come up with the class version of it. I don't know if it's going to actually do the Morse
That's
code side of
a
it, but
curious doc string for a class.
yeah. So
Hasn't even done the
it's
init yet function yet.
okay. So it is actually writing it
Wow.
all as Morse code as well,
Oh, might take a
which is
while.
yeah, maybe it wasn't the best idea. So we'll see how this goes. But you can see essentially how it's completing the to-dos, multiple to-dos at once, which for a small thing like this is fine. And then you might want to rephrase it to do something else instead, remove the Morse code thing because it's not actually that helpful. But we'll let it keep going and we'll come back to that in a little while. But that's how we were able to get it. I was able to get it working.
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll come back to that exercise.
That's
So the
cool.
next thing,
You can always hit stop generating and because it's just going to, who knows how long that's going to be.
yeah, it's using up a lot of tokens, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's just make a
And
little
then just
change here. Remove that one using shorthand. I don't even know what shorthand syntax is, but
oh,
yeah, you can see it's done slightly differently this time. There we go.
so I guess you can get it to be as verbose as you or verbose as you want it to be depending on your prompt in these doc strings.
So it's a relatively small function that it shouldn't take too long to complete. And then once we've got that, we can just run through an example of actually generating a commit message for it, which I'll start writing now.
That's
Cool.
cool. Listing the changes exactly. Sometimes for me, I think number 4 does a really good job at it, but it would write the 3.5 would write the code and I wouldn't know exactly what it changed. It'll just say that here's the new function, here's how to run it. And then you don't actually know what it changed, and it might have only just changed one line. Yeah.
Yep. So there's your commit message. So you got your short first line, and then you got your longer details about what needs to be added. I didn't particularly like that one, but it's using feat, which is, I guess, a common because it's adding a new feature potentially. Anyway, so that's good. I guess we can move on to the next one. We should impose our self time limits on stuff. But that
Yep.
was big. The other thing that was useful to mention about GPT-4, last thing, is it now seems long enough to take in a typical meeting. Like So I found my typical meetings are half an hour. I was able to transcribe the meetings and then have it summarize key points. And so I've been engineering the prompt to figure out how to get I was having some of my team listen to an hour long recording with a client or something. Doesn't always make sense. So figuring out the right prompt to get the information that's needed without losing anything it has been a little bit of a challenge. And I heard one guy online talking about coming up with a sparse representation. So what is the essential information needed to reconstruct that meeting transcript? And so that's really what I've been trying to figure out how to extract. And I think 8K is almost long enough to do it most of the time. Sometimes not quite, but it's certainly a lot better than the 4K version before. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
All right. So moving on. The next thing we're
Cool.
going to cover is LangChain. LangChain is a pretty exciting project
Yeah.
that, yeah, I haven't played around with too much myself.
I've got the definition here if you want to
Yeah, you
know
go for it.
about it. So LangChain is a framework built around large language models. It allows users to chain together different components such as prompts and templates, language models, agents, memory to create more advanced use cases around LangChains. So they have heaps of one of the biggest things that I've seen with it is that they have quite a few memory modules that allow you to more optimally store and interact with memory, or like a Q&A bot, for example. You can use it for building chatbots, generative Q&As, summarization, and a lot of other things, just like you can with OpenAI GPT-4, but you can integrate with multiple models. It's not just stuck with one. You could even integrate it with your own custom models. The library offers features for building tools around LLMs. There's a huge handbook, and they have a lot of educational content online. But the whole thing is around sort of prompt engineering, prompt templates, and chatbot memory, the main components of it. And we are still investigating it, and we're looking at integrating it into some of our products. We just have to experiment with it some more and make sure we have our head around it in a way that is robust and secure. But yeah, it's looking really promising. It's a good wrapper, high level wrapper. If you say, for instance, need a fallback model that maybe the API is down for the other model, and you have another model that's trained that's pretty good as a fallback model, you can quickly just swap it out and pass in the context, the previous context, and it can pick up where we left off. So that's one of the use cases that we've thought of. But yeah, do you have anything to add to that, Nathan?
I don't have anything specific. I wanted to earmark it more as something for us to just have a little bit of look over. I saw and some people, from what I saw, people using it, you can chain things together. So you can ask it to open a document and then chain a bunch of different prompts together.
Yep.
I assume conditional stuff based on those prompts. And it's got things that'll help you open a PDF file or take an audio input and then turn it into text or like whatever it is that you need to do. I had a look through the code and I saw support for a lot of different language models. So when I went into LangChain here and I looked at large language models, I was like, wow, they have a whole heap of support for all sorts of different stuff here. Here's NLP Cloud, which is one that I use for summarization. Here is OpenAI's one. And so I think there's also support for self-hosted stuff that you could run locally as well. There's the Alpaca one as well. So yeah, I was keen to see what it could do and see, yeah, what use cases we have for it. One of the things that I think we potentially will use it for is as intermediate for we're building out a backend for large language models that'll has an iOS or Android front end, and we want to make it agnostic in terms of the large language model it uses. And so, given that LangChain seems to have support for a large number of large language models, it could be a natural candidate for us to use as a sort of proxy that lets us switch out the large language model depending on the sort of task the user wants to do. And so that's the angle I'm coming at it from. Yeah. But you,
No, that's all I have to say. I'm looking forward to using it more, having time to sit down and build a chatbot with it or something like that. This looks like it's going to be quite powerful. The couple of questions that I'm interested in is, can it support streaming? I believe it can. I've come across some information about the documentation. So OpenAI GPT-3 and 4 has a flag called stream, and you can set it to true. So just ChatGPT, you can stream word by word back. And in what is that useful for though? It's on one, it adds some interaction and you can see that it's working. It's not just like waiting for the whole response to be finished and then dumping the message. It's actually word by word. So it is quite much more interesting to engage with. The other thing is that if you want to stream back and then feed into text to speech model, where you've got some kind of visual model or someone literally AI model talking what's coming in from the stream, then you obviously need to stream it. You can't just have it wait until it's finished and then dump it all. And then you get this massive reading bot. I don't know if you've ever experienced with some of the home assistants where it just, you ask it something and then it just goes on this really verbose like description that you just don't want to hear. You just want to hear something quickly. Yeah, so that's the last thing from a user experience point of view. But yeah, so I think, yeah, keep an eye on the space for a long LangChain and what the guys at AI Kingdom will do with it. I think pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I think for our use case, like something like if we want to set up a organizational memory, like for an example here, they're working around along is are working around is the limits of length with the prompts. One of the ways that they're dealing with that here is that they're how do you deal with it? Do you do a map reduce or so they initially here in this particular blog they go through the idea of doing a multi-step map reduce, but then they then go on and there's other modules you can use to use a vector space search, which is something like Pinecone, I would imagine. And
Mm.
that's a more efficient sort of way to handle ingesting all the documents and then doing that. So it will be interesting to see how we can use that. All right. Do you want to go on to the Alpaca?
Yeah, some of you guys might have heard of Alpaca or Llama, which came first. So these Llama model was came out of, and I think they've open sourced it. I think they accidentally leaked the weights, and that's where some of the other advancements came quite quickly. So Llama is fully open source language model made by Meta. I should probably stop saying Facebook. It's powerful, but it's not built for answering questions. It's more like a fancy version of autocomplete in a conversational type bot. And what's also come out is, where is it? Alpaca, or maybe I've got them around the wrong way.
Stanford Alpaca.
Stanford Alpaca, that's the new one, isn't it? So that was announced last week. And what's epic about Stanford Alpaca is that up until this point, we've had companies like OpenAI, Facebook, and probably Google and Apple have all been working on their own models as well, training their own models on like 30,000 GPUs, and just the infrastructure required is millions of dollars. But what's happened with Alpaca from Stanford University is that they were able to use GPT-3 to write the instruction set to fine tune the Llama model to be almost just as good as GPT-3. And the amazing thing is that it only took $600 US to do. And so I think what we're starting to see here is what I like to call the level of escalation. It's where technology is built on technologies, technology is built on technologies. For example, microcontrollers. We have a lot of we all have microcontrollers built in our RC cars, our little pieces of electronics, our computers, through our real cars. But the code on those microcontrollers, which is usually assembly or a machine code or something like that, is typically no longer programmed much anymore because it was all built. The microcontroller and the manufacturer handle all of that in one hit. And then higher abstraction codes like C or C sharp or C plus, Objective C, they then now enable you to build entire systems like like operating systems on top of this lower level hardware languages. So we're just building upon layer and layer. And then you have people making movies from a laptop, with an operating system that's built in C. So it's like abstraction on abstraction on abstraction. And so I think that's what's going to happen is that you might not ever have to train these massive, huge models again. I think some companies, the billion-dollar companies, will do it because they have the resources to do it just to get better and better. And then as the new graphics GPUs come out, which are insanely more powerful than the ones we have in data centers now, and the technology is already in the pipeline, that cost is even going to drop as well. But we're going to get to a point where you could you can fine tune a model on your CPU. That would be epic. If you could run a model, even just run inference on a model on a CPU and not a GPU, then that's going to be game changing because everyone could have very specific targeted models for a very specific thing, multiple of them, just sitting on your computer. Um, and so imagine if you're condensing this
And this
7 billion model down to using it on the CPU.
And I think this feeds into what we want to do in terms of data sovereignty as well. Because if we can,
Absolutely.
I mean, at the moment, we're not going to veer off and set this up for our project, but we'll steer with OpenAI for the time being. But as soon as we have extra capacity in terms of development, it makes perfect sense to try and see if we can set up our own model that performs locally just as well. That way, all of the data that we have for our project will be retained locally. And then maybe we just need to reach out for in certain instances. So that will be very interesting to see if that is a possibility. And I noted they were running it on much lower power devices as well,
Yeah.
Raspberry Pis and stuff.
Yeah. 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 Some people have got it working. I think it's really slow. And I think this is the thing, right? So back when the GPT-3 came out, there was like this prediction that within 5 years, we'll be able to train these models for less than $1,000. It happened in a few months. So it's shocking.
One of the
Uh,
things is though that OpenAI does have something in their terms and services, terms and conditions that
yeah.
you can't use their service for generating other LLMs.
Yeah. So maybe they have agreements with educational institutions or some. I'm not sure how the legal side of it works. But there's also plenty of other LLMs out there which are open source. For example, the Llama ones, like they're available. And then you've got experience with the Neo X model.
Yeah, so it's this one.
But I am excited if it does end up being a world where it's not monopolized by large corporations and everyone could potentially just have their own chat assistant running locally, consuming very little resources. I think that's game changing.
Yeah. So I would point anyone over to this video here where he goes into a bit more depth about yeah, running Alpaca and Llama locally and answering all your questions. So yeah, that's something that's worth
Yeah.
checking out.
Yeah, that's a good
Um,
video.
yeah,
Yeah, cool. The next thing is Mid-Journey.
sure.
So AI image generation, we've touched on before, is come a long way. It's still challenging to train it on your own faces and do deep fakes and fine tunes. You still need to have sort of computer science background to do it. There are some resources now that make it easier to do it on your own computer, like Automatic 1111, which is like a web GUI for Stable Diffusion. But Midjourney 5 has just been released and it's their own custom model. It's trained quite differently than a usual model would be. And it's super realistic. Yeah, it's pretty shocking actually how good it is. Midjourney 4 was good already, but Midjourney 5 is next level. The detail is next level. And you can literally, yeah, get it to show anything. I can show you some examples as well, just in my Midjourney Discord account.
Yeah, could you? I don't have the Discord.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's coming up now.
Yeah, so this is just an example. I did one futuristic high-tech computer lab with AI, simple textures, clear objects, use purple and blue tones, can look 3D with computer screens, version 5, aspect ratio 3 by 2, just wide. And it came up with these three configurations, and this is what we were building our own Upwork profiles, and I used this as a background for our banner image. And I ended up choosing this middle image. And yeah, it's just epic what you can do. But I've been using it for lots of other things. You can use it for 3D design of shapes and all kinds of things. You could do that with V4 too. Landscapes. This is a random one that I did for my son. It was a male lion brushing teeth in front of the mirror wearing pajamas. And I've got a 3-year-old and he found that incredibly funny. I did have a fail though. I did beach fire trucks with elephant firefighters trying to dig it out. And yeah, ended up with the fire truck on the beach that was merged with an elephant, which was quite interesting. And that's a beach whale. And then we did some beach boats. So you can do some really high detail. And they're just stunning. There's a dog as a pilot flying an air on in a Boeing 777. So yeah,
Cool.
that's some of the cool stuff you can do. I just wish they had an API. They don't have one yet, but of course you can still deploy your own models. It just seems other stable diffusion models aren't quite as good yet, but they're getting there. We've started.
Yeah.
You probably saw if you're watching this on YouTube, you probably saw we're starting to use our own trained custom models for doing our faces for our YouTube thumbnails, and we have done another video on that which wasn't very eventful in that video. It wasn't until afterwards that we actually started getting good results from it by mostly prompt engineering. I didn't change much in terms of training, but prompt engineering was the main thing and giving it more creative direction.
I think one of the big things they fixed was having people generated with the right number of fingers. So here
Yeah, so
you
it looked like.
hear people with a
Yeah,
number of
that's right.
fingers,
Yeah,
and here you actually can't see too many hands. But
yeah, that's been a well-known thing. Hopefully
yeah,
they fix it.
yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Any
Anyway,
shout out?
I don't use it too much. I use mostly Stable Diffusion when I can, especially if we're using our own models. But I do use it for the occasional background or thing like that if I just can manually do it. But my goal, of course, being in the AI kingdom network is to automate as much as possible. So I can't automate Mid-Journey, so therefore I very rarely use it.
We were going to cover Bard next, but I think that we may skip over that for now. We'll come back to that in another episode.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, been a few announcements, but I know it won't really impact us too much in terms of how we do things. So it might impact end users a bit more who are using their tools. I'm curious about it, sure, but I often use Google Docs. So one day, if it's integrated into Google Docs, which I believe it will be, I believe that's on the way, then that would be something that I might leverage. But I could still just use ChatGPT. Yeah. Anyway,
No,
what's next on our list?
I think we're at the end, buddy.
Okay.
So yeah, we had a couple of ideas to talk about the prompts that we have, but I think we come to a natural end there. We can maybe just chat a little bit about the project that we were going to cover and from
Yep.
there. So
So
we're continuing to push forwards. This week, we're planning to release the first version of our Flutter-based iOS and Android application for called Curious Critters, which is based on a large language model, and it will help as for kids to have a sort of assistant that can provide answers to the questions. And so this was based around a use case that I personally experienced. My son asking me questions. Hey, Dad, why is something? And I'm like, I don't know. That's a very good question. I used to say we should Google it, but then around the rise of this GPT stuff, I was like, maybe I can just create an app for him that he can use and he can ask when he has questions. I'm sure most of the questions he asks are going to be related to how he can do things in Minecraft, but the general idea is that we can release this as an example of our capabilities as an agency, and so we'll be looking for using this is going to be white labeled, so we can use this to create all different sorts of applications that leverage large language models and then embed them in an app where your end users, your customers, your suppliers, your sales agents, or whatever can open up. They can ask a question. They can leverage the not only OpenAI or large language models, but they can also leverage the custom proprietary data that you may have. So we can fine tune models. We can build out memory for organizations that expose all that. And so the use case might be something like a sales rep asking about a particular contact and when the last time they were contacted was and what was said to them or something like that. We could pull all that information in and then display it into a chat for a particular sales agent. The possibilities are endless, really, for business coaching, assistance, all sorts of applications. Goes
internal
on.
internal knowledge bases for
Mm,
staff, and
yeah.
even support knowledge bases for customers.
Yeah, and so we're not saying that we have all the answers for everything, but we have a really good base on which to build things. So we don't have to build custom projects from scratch. You can leverage all
Mhm.
of the front end technology work that we've done. We have a white label back end server that you could deploy in your own data center if need be and keep logs. And the other thing is that it'll keep track of all of the queries that have gone on over time. So you can use this as a source of training data for future expansion. So you can see the sort of queries that people are asking. You might be able to figure out where you have knowledge deficiencies, other systems and processes that you could implement to improve for your suppliers or team members or staff or even family. So for example, I'll be able to see what my son's searching for. I keep an eye on what's up, and if I want to, I'll be able to adjust the prompts. So I'll be able to, as a parent, go into the parent settings and customize what sort of things are appropriate. Which age level should answers be returned? Should it be explained to a 7-year-old? Should it be explained at a 10-year-old level, a teenager level? Yeah. So those are some of the things that are coming down the line, and yeah, something to watch out for.
Yeah, that's great, man. I'm excited. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we're trying to create as much content as possible with the help of these AI assistants. So we're trying to maximally leverage technology so we can leverage our time. But we've got developed a lot of internal tools such as a summarizer, which takes the video, transcribes it, takes a video that we create, like this one, transcribes it. It's a really big transcription, as you can imagine, and then it outputs. does a summarization, and then it outputs a blog and outputs a social media post. So there's a lot of things you can do to leverage this technology that you could take it another step further, and it could post to those networks. You could create your own custom APIs, or you could integrate with a social media queuing or scheduling tool like Buffer or something like that.
You could also do things like we make a lot of internal like videos for training. Last night I made a 30-minute video on some of the work I'd done. So we could deploy the same sort of tools to turn that into something that is indexable, like documentation, for example,
Yeah.
of that new process, right?
And that's right. That's all it takes. A lot of small businesses who struggle to have standard operating procedures, ultimately, it's just a collection of videos and documents that people can refer to. And sometimes some businesses or clientele that digest different types of content differently. So that your staff might prefer video content, might prefer article content. It's good to have both. So if you just did one by just speaking to a phone or doing a dictaphone or something on how to do something, then you can leverage these tools to easily turn that into the other. It's much harder to create a video, of course, like a full video, unless you just basically have an audiogram and some pictures, but and not your face. But yeah, going from a video to text is there's any number of things you can do.
Yeah, that's something that I've found myself doing is when I find I'm repeating myself or I'm having to really spell out a policy and I'm like, I don't want to have to tell people this again. To take the essence of that conversation and put it into a policy. So
Mm.
it could be like an internal Slack conversation, taking that, summarizing that, turning it into something that goes in the company handbook. And then you could render the company handbook also as like a video training
Yep.
material as well. So
Yep.
reach out if any of those things are of interest to you. There is a free consultation that we're running. So just click through there, book a time that suits you, and Roger or myself will jump on a call with you, go over your concept.
Great. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Talk to you later. Bye.